for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.
Today on the show, I've got Lina Shields, the Chief Media Officer for Lilly USA. So today on the show, we're going to talk quite a bit about her career path, some of the mentors and mentoring that she's doing today, and the advice that she got to improve your career and advocate for yourself, frankly. If you enjoy and take away some of the keen insights from Leena today. After all, I highly enjoyed the conversation, and Adage has named her one of their women to watch in 2019. Leena, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alan. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, I thought we could start with a personal story. And I'd love to hear about where you grew up in Italy and made you decide to come to the US.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Italy. I'm from the southern part of Italy, from Calabria for the majority of my family. But my father was in the Italian army, so we moved every couple of years. So the majority of my time has been spent in Rome. And so I consider myself from Rome, but culturally from the south of Italy. And I moved to the US the first time in 2003. And then pursued my MBA in the US. I moved from Rome to Los Angeles in California, got my MBA. I got here on a student visa. So I was able to actually get that fairly quickly because all I could do was study. So I got my MBA in a year and then started working in sales for Lilly shortly thereafter in LA, and then moved to Indianapolis for other marketing opportunity, then back to Europe for marketing leadership roles. And then this is my second time in the US.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I mean, Italy is one of my favorite places to go. I think I may have mentioned this before when we were talking, but it's where I engaged to my wife.
Yeah.
Proposed in Florence. So Florence has a special place in my heart, but Rome is nice too.
Yeah. Well, Florence is where our affiliate is based too. So my second time in Europe with Lilly, I was based in Florence. Yeah. Yeah. You really can't go wrong, really, any parts of Italy, I think. But I'm biased.
No, exactly. Exactly. Well, let's talk about your background. And it looks like, if I look at your LinkedIn profile, most of your career has been with Lilly, 15 years since your MBA, like you said. Is that where you started? And were there any pivotal twists along the way?
Yeah, so in the US, once I moved to the US, the majority of my career has been in Lilly. I didn't plan to be a Lilly once I got out of didn't plan to be in the pharmaceutical industry. When I was going to school and university, actually what I wanted to do was work in global policy, and really, truly, I just wanted to change the world. So I'm a political science major, and my dream was to work at the United Nations and work on global policies that actually made impact in how less fortunate people live their lives. So I think I'm still living some of that dream, but I'm doing that on the commercial side. And my job is really to give information that bring people medicines that can help them live healthier and longer lives. So I started in Italy, graduated from university in Italy, moved to the US, Los Angeles, like I was mentioning, got my MBA. And then after that, what I wanted to do was, at that point, I knew I wanted to be in marketing. And so what I wanted to do was to work for a Fortune 500 company and in a marketing role. And I wanted to have a company to work for that had a big impact again on people. So I wanted to work in big advertising. But I quickly found out, as I have moved to the US on my own, I didn't really have any network. I didn't have any resume, any connection. Now looking back and, as we hire MBA grads, I'm just amazed at my lack of knowledge of the process and how I could have leveraged some of those processes. But I cold call a lot of my way in, including my internship actually. And then by the time it was time for me to find a job and want to have this job in marketing, I realized very quickly that without any network, I couldn't really land the marketing job that I wanted. And a lot of the companies I wanted to work for were on the East Coast at the time. And so it became clear that sales for me was going to be a way for me to build my way into marketing. And so I didn't want to sell printers or sell things that were actual sales. And so I realized that pharmaceutical marketing was more of a consultative type of sale where you were working with doctors to help them figure out, what would be the best candidate for a product that particular company had. And so I basically, at the time, it was now 15 years ago, the internet existed, but there wasn't a whole lot of user-generated content online. And so I found this book that was called How to Land a Pharmaceutical Sales Job in 3 Days. And I bought the book. And I did everything that the book said to do, everything down to like my attire, everything. And it took me more than 3 days. It took me 5 months, but within 5 months, I had 2 offers on the tables from 2 major pharmaceutical companies. And one of them was from Lilly. And I chose Lilly. And then from there, I stayed 3 years in sales, every year reminding people that what I wanted to do was marketing. And I think, you asked about pivotal twists and mentors within my career. I think the 2 pivotal twist that I can kind of identify was definitely when I was able to get out of from sales to getting into marketing. So I moved to Indianapolis to, as kind of a theme, the first half of my career, I always took the job no one wanted. And so I took the job in marketing that no one wanted at the time, which was what they used to call e-marketing, not even digital marketing at the time. And then I think later on in my career, as I established myself in marketing, I had, some successes under my belt. I think the other big pivotal point for me was when I got a regional leadership role for Cialis in Europe. So I was deployed to Europe on assignment, and I was the regional brand leader for Cialis for Australia, Canada, and Europe. And I was responsible for the commercialization of Cialis, as well as preparing all those affiliates for the launch of the BPH indication for benign prostatic hyperplasia in all of those countries. And that has really propelled me more into, once I was established as a marketer, really fast forward my management career. So I think those will be the big 2 changes and twists in my career.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And we're going to talk more about that, moving from sales to marketing, but I don't want to leave off this story that you told me when we first talked about getting your internship, because I loved this story. So do you mind telling the story for listeners?
Yeah, I sometimes forget that.
I think it says a lot about your hustle.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So when I first moved to the US, again, I knew nothing. It was basically my first time in the US, and I went straight from university in Italy to my MBA school. And there was a lot of cultural adjustment, obviously, that needed to happen. I spoke English, but differently than how I speak it today. And I had learned the majority of my English through music, so there was another adjustment. But I would say halfway through the year on the MBA, again, I was only doing that because I was on a student visa. And halfway through the year, everybody disappeared from campus, and I didn't know where everybody was. I didn't know where all my schoolmates were. And I asked around, and they were like, "Oh, they're doing the internships." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I didn't know we're supposed to do internships. And they said, "Well, you're supposed to go get yourself an internship and get your experience." So explain to me what an internship was, because you have to remember, in Italy, even just the academic system is very different. It's truly academic and is based on study. So we don't have, unfortunately, a lot of hands-on experience. Mm-hmm. So explain to me what an internship was. And they say, you're supposed to get yourself an internship halfway through. So then you have a way to, have experience when you finish your MBA. So for me, with that signal, I took that pretty literally, the way I was speaking English back then. So when they say get yourself an internship, I thought I was supposed to go out and get myself an internship. So what I wanted to do at the time, I knew I wanted to work in marketing, but at the time, I just moved to Los Angeles, and me being such a huge fan of music and entertainment, and, that being the way that I have learned the American culture and just English itself, I was just so fascinated in LA by everything that was Hollywood related. And it was just like living in a reality show for me. It was amazing. And so what I wanted to do was marketing of entertainment. So I wanted to market movies and music at the time. I thought that was going to be a good way for me to do it. So I just thought, okay, so I'm going to go get myself an internship at the Motion Picture Association of America, because why not? So I literally drove my little Nissan Altima at the time to the Motion Picture Association. I parked and I went up and said, that I was their intern and that I was there for the internship. And they were like, oh. So, the long story short, somehow I did get in front. I mean, I suppose once they saw me at the door, they were like, okay, you just run with the story. And it wasn't me being bold. It was me truly being clueless. I didn't know that that's not how you get internships. So I kept saying I was there to get the internship and to, talk to somebody about getting the internship there, and that I was their intern. And so eventually I sat down with this hiring director, who was the director for worldwide market research, and went through what I was expecting to be an interview, because I knew I had to kind of compete for that. And she kept saying, we usually get interns from Pepperdine. This is so weird. I haven't even heard of this school before. And I was like, well, that's that's what you're getting today. And so I finished my interview. They had me interviewing with a bunch of other people. And eventually they offered me the internship. And I went through the whole process of the internship, did my project, which ironically, based on the job that I do today, ironically, my project was to figure out if there was a business case to one day stream movies on the internet, which I think is fascinating given what I do today, which I said, yes, there was a business case in Japan and the US, according to my opinion at the time. And I did the whole entire internship. And it wasn't until later on that I actually figured out that that's not how other people had gotten an internship. There was a process. And so it was a great experience because I don't think I would have ever gotten into the Motion Picture Association of America through the regular process. But it also, I guess it was unintentionally courageous, but it was a great experience.
No, yeah. I mean, it's funny and comical, but at the same time, like, I'm like, I'm gonna go get me a job. Like, I'm gonna,
Basically.
I'm gonna go sit in the chair, literally. I'm
Right.
gonna
Like
find
I'm
it.
gonna go fetch it,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. And I love it. I love this story because, I mean, how many you set yourself apart. You may not even you didn't know it, right? But you set yourself
Yeah.
apart by just going and getting it, right? And that's such a great story. It's such a great story.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about this transition we were talking about. I mean, so you go get yourself an internship, and then ultimately you land in sales at Lilly, and you can understand like showing up is a big part of the sales role, right? And
Mhm.
detailing doctors that you're assigned to. But tell me about what that early sales experience was like for you, and what did it mean for you?
Yeah, it was again, that was technically my first paid job in the US too. So I think for me it meant probably more than other people in the job. At the time is interesting because I was right at the cusp when pharmaceutical companies were changing their models for who the profile of people they were looking for pharmaceutical sales jobs. So when I was interviewing, I was still competing with 50-year-old pharmacists that had years and years of experience in pharmacy and like very deep product knowledge and scientific expertise. And it was just at the time when actually Pfizer had, as kind of the pioneer that I consider them to be, they had realized that, scientific knowledge is very important, but at the same time, access and time with doctors was becoming a hot commodity. And so it was equally as important to have people in the job that were able to establish personal relationship and establish trust very quickly with physicians. And so to be able to get access and time with them. And so I came right at the cusp where, the scientific knowledge was still a must. And at the same time, they were looking for people that would know how to sell, basically, and which I didn't. So let's be clear about that. And so I studied everything that book says. So, I pretty much could anticipate what they were looking like, what they were looking for in the interviews. And the interviews were very structured. So I studied that book. I did everything that book did, and I got the job. And once I started the job, it was a little bit different than your typical pharma jobs because I started as an account sales rep for Kaiser Permanente. So my only client was Kaiser Permanente in Southern California in the Inland Empire, which again started this trail of jobs that nobody wanted because, the job was great. The Kaiser Permanente job was amazing. As a sales rep, the Inland Empire, not so much. So I had everything from, Temecula all the way to the high desert. So I was
Mm.
selling in a suit in 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was my job
Yeah.
every single day in the desert where nobody wanted to go at the time. But I think for me, what that did is it actually explained unintentionally something very important then for my marketing career later on. What it did is, first of all, having an account job instead of having two or three specific products like most pharmaceutical reps, it taught me to have breadth of portfolio, making connections where obviously allowed, but also understanding the totality of the job that an internist would do or a psychiatrist would do, and understanding what their problems were. So the thing that the sales experience really gave me that I think I perhaps experienced a little bit differently than other people. Most people get into a sales job and they really want to have that for the rest of their life and they become great people at selling. I didn't have that aspiration for me in my life. And so what I quickly gravitated towards was really understanding what was the doctor's problem. I looked at the doctor as you would a consumer. I looked at the doctor as somebody that was trying to help fix problems for, and quickly realized that both him and I her and I had something in common, which was we both were motivated by the best interest of the patient and helping people get better. And so if you understand that, I think it gave me kind of a leg up in really
Mm.
transforming the way the sales call would go from a 5-minute, hey, doctor, would you sign here for samples, to really become almost a trusted advisor because it really became the same foundation that I have today in marketing, which is what's the insight, meaning what is the tension that in marketing, I would say a consumer has, but in that case, a doctor has. What is the problem they have when the patient sits in the chair? And what is the benefit that my product can offer? So it almost became a pseudo marketing job that I wasn't aware of until I fully transitioned into marketing. So for me, it was greatly formative. I think it also gave me a lot of credibility within the industry because at the time when I transitioned in, you had to have carried the bag to be in marketing. And so that kind of checked the box big time, even though I didn't have that as an aspiration. I wanted to get into marketing.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. And I know you've had after that transition, you have a successful number of appointments from in the marketing organization.
Mhm.
And I think your latest move was from the brand or consumer marketing side to this chief media officer
Mhm.
position. And so I'd love to hear how you talk about this new chief media officer position that you're holding now and how it's defined and what you're focused on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I transitioned to this role towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. And before that, I was the senior director of consumer marketing for all of the diabetes portfolio. So, in that role, that was more of a traditional brand marketing role across all of the brands that we have in the diabetes business unit, which is our biggest business unit at Lilly. So, while that was a great role, at the same time, the global CMO that we had at the time, yeah, I was working closely with him, and he had this tendency to just put stuff under me when he didn't know where to put them. And so, very quickly, once I took that role, he gave me also the charge to run the media piece at the beginning, which was, it was kind of small at the beginning because it was fragmented across all brands, and then to run our digital transformation, as well as I restarted, basically resuscitated this charter for multicultural marketing that we had at the time with the executive committee. So the job had become really, really big. And when he retired, I was given the chance to choose in their mind, it was kind of like, which way do you want to go? What I did instead was pretty much recraft the role that I really wanted to do and where I saw the majority of growth, both for myself, but also for the company. I crafted this role so that I could really try to propel Lilly as a outright advertiser in the advertising space, as well as, I want them and I want the company to obviously have a competitive advantage in this area in the pharmaceutical industry as well. So while I had the chance to stay in brand marketing, I had done that at every level in my career. As much as I love it, I'd done it regionally, I'd done it globally, I'd done it in the US. And so I think this side of the house attracted me much more. And also I identified this as modern day marketing, where I feel like at Lilly, we're still a little bit in the 90s sometimes. So I saw a huge opportunity to really propel the company and propel my growth as well. And so the way this role is structured right now, the chief media officer role, actually, coincidentally, at the same time, the ANA had published a white paper around the role of a chief media officer and why most brands that have a substantial investment in media should have a chief media officer. So when I took a look at that white paper and I took a look at the role that I had, it was pretty much a carbon copy. And so it was very easy, to make the case that the company needed a chief media officer. And that's how we created the role. While we did that, I then built it around three main areas that I oversee today. And those areas are definitely the media investment, by which we went from basically having 22 different scope of works for 22 different brands that has some sort of advertising to all the way full DTC mix, to now have an integrated portfolio look where we show up as a close to $1 billion advertiser in the industry. And we have a portfolio strategy to maximize revenue and using media as a way to drive revenue and intensify our ability to bring relevant information to patients in a timely manner. So I really moved it from just basically scope of work to an actual portfolio investment that is now managed at the CEO level. And so that's a big part of obviously the chief media officer job it's around media, but I also kept multicultural marketing, which is, I think, very important for us at Lilly to develop centrally before we embed it into the system. And we have built multicultural marketing from, again, a revenue generating perspective. So when I reinstated that charter with the executive committee, purposely I didn't add a business case to it because I think the business case should be the population that we serve and the multicultural nature of the population. And so we have had some great results this year that really point to the fact that this is an additional growth factor for us. And then the third bucket is the digital transformation, what we call NGC, next generation customer engagement, specifically in my world for consumers. And that's really what I jokingly and lovingly say is bringing Lilly to the 21st century. So it's really changing how our brands show up and making sure that we employ a digital first approach. So under that bucket, I run a startup model for a brand specifically where we're prototyping our new go-to-market model from a marketing perspective, everything from our MarTech and data structure to then be sure that we can create structures that are repeatable across brands and we can maximize the way we reach consumers across the journey before, during, and after prescription. So those are really the three big buckets that are today under the Chief Media Officer role at Lilly USA.
I love it. So tell me a little bit more. I know you just talked about or just highlighted digital transformation, but maybe give us a little bit more in terms of, I know it's a changing of media types, but also what else is under that next generation consumer landscape?
Yeah, I think, one way to summarize it is it's actually a huge passion point for me. Because one way to summarize it is if you look at pharmaceutical advertising across the years, let's just say the last decade,
Hmm.
and I will just speak for Lilly, but in general, our advertising has been very acquisition focused and has been very teleassertive. So we will identify brands that we need to increase demand of and increase awareness of. Usually, is huge launches of medications that we think have a great revenue potential and a great patient need as well. So that we can, obviously, we start always from the patient need first. But our advertising model has always been, I think, very teleassertive in the fact that we have a heavy TV mix. We go on television and we tell people, go to your doctor, go to your doctor, go to your doctor. And then we kind of follow them through conversion or prescription and really didn't have a holistic view of what the experience is for patients. So if you take it back to 10, 15 years ago, when at Lilly we started launching Cialis. Cialis was really the first medication that we had where we needed to have a consumer-centric approach, but also really needed to root ourselves into insight-based marketing. It wasn't just about the product feature, but it was about what was missing from people's life and from men that were suffering from erectile dysfunction. We had a formidable competitor at the time, and they had done a great work creating the market basket and the market itself for erectile dysfunction. I think internally what we had to develop was really the capability that laid the foundation for insight-based marketing and the basics of advertising, which has been fantastic, has led us to great success in market for more than just Cialis and the other consumer products. Once I came back from Europe and I took a job as the consumer director for psoriasis first and then moved on to diabetes, I think I was just surprised to find that our medicines, we have brought so many great medicines to life and through the pipeline, but our ways of marketing and our consumer marketing, although still very solid and rooted in insight, I was very surprised that we hadn't really evolved with the way the media mix had evolved and just people's media consumption habits had evolved. And so we still had, just to give you a sense, when I took the team over, we still had a 70 to 80% television mix with a lot of print still and just very little digital. And digital was really just banners. That's all we were doing. So fast forward 2 years, and a lot of this through this next generation customer engagement model, but really also through this digital transformation approach that we have. We now have obviously a much more balanced mix that is getting closer to be 50-50 between traditional media, linear, and digital assets. But we also have, digital media. But we also have an underpinning of a data strategy that enables better targeting and that's geared to revenue creation. So it's not just placing digital, it's making sure that we can catch digital, that we have the data infrastructure to do that. But it's also making sure that everything we do is measurable and is ultimately, we are able to conduce it back to, did it work? Did it bring patients to the doctor? Were we able to give information to patients that fostered action where appropriate? And so I think the big change is going from a marketing perspective, this kind of TV heavy, very traditional media mix and teleassertive mode, go to your doctor, then realize a prescription and be done, to now understanding what's the experience across the journey. We're very good at depicting, and we have been very good at depicting the emotional journey of patients that go through any particular diagnosis and living with the disease. The aspiration of what we're trying to do on the startup model is being able to be just as good and just as precise in understanding that experience online and that experience through media, so that we can understand what are the key moments across the journey before people get to prescription, during that prescription moment, and afterwards. So we don't abandon the patient afterwards, but we're able to support the experience. And ultimately, we believe that will create better experience for patients and a value creation for Lilly as well.
I love it. I love it. And I want to talk a little bit more as well about your multicultural efforts that you mentioned before. And it's one of the things that,
Mhm.
as an outsider, it's always hard to understand what's going on inside a company as someone that doesn't work there every day. But
Yeah.
you can always see the ads, right? Or the communications that they put out in the marketplace. And it's one of the things that I kind of applaud Lilly and all your various, brands, the drug brands that you have. The communications are usually fairly diverse in the people that are represented in those,
Mhm.
the backgrounds that they come from. And so I would love to get the backstory, if you will, you
Yeah.
know, the around multicultural initiatives at Lilly and how you're driving them as well.
Yeah, you asked what are some of the big changes I'm driving as the chief media officer, and it's interesting that I would want a multicultural to stay with me, but I think one of the biggest thing I have done and that I'm proud of having done, or in general, I think it's a theme throughout my career. It's always challenging the status quo, and I think part of my job, especially in this role, is always to keep asking, well, why not? Why can't we do this? And
Mhm.
this, I think, has been an example of that. I think on paper, when you talk about multicultural marketing, no one will argue that the population in the U.S. has changed and it's a need. But I think a lot of what you find in different companies, not just Lilly, is that, well, general media reaches our multicultural consumer as well. And, as long to your point, as you have diverse representation in your TV advertising and your advertising in general, you're covered for multicultural marketing. And I think I challenge that. And part of the discussion was, of course, it's great to have great representation. I think we were always very careful with talent selection to make sure that it was representative of our target patient. And of course, that, required diversity, and we were careful of that. But to me, multicultural marketing goes a little bit deeper than just representation. So
Mhm.
if you think about in simple way, what's marketing and what's great marketing? Marketing is, highlighting product feature, putting the product in the right place, giving it the right price, make sure it sells in a way, in a nutshell. But great marketing is where you understand the core tension of your target audience. You understand your target better than your competitors, the emotional value that they put on those tensions, and what are the motivators that ultimately would drive them to action. And then you deploy and use that understanding so that you can associate to your product feature and higher order emotional benefit. So if that's how we do marketing, and that's, I think, was exemplified for us by Cialis and Cymbalta and how we approach those molecules. And, it wasn't just about the product feature. It was about the emotional benefit that was heightened for the consumer because we understood what they were missing. So if
Mhm.
that's how we approach marketing, then why wouldn't we look at the same way when we look at multicultural marketing and at a different consumer? And so the thought behind multicultural marketing was, there were a lot of, the backstory was there were a lot of start and stops. So, what I noticed, it was also because we always associated a business plan of some sort of a short-term nature. So if you give me X million dollars to start this, I will bring X million back in 2 years. And because
Mhm.
this segment will create growth. And I decided to approach it a little bit different. I decided to approach it as, we don't have a choice, but not to understand this consumer, because this consumer will become our totality of our audience very quickly. And, I'm very passionate also about the understanding that the brand has to have about culture in general. So this was really the first step to get to a broader cultural communication and understanding. And so if that was the foundation from which my conversation started, then the next piece, and I continue to say this every day when we talk about multicultural marketing here within these four walls at Lilly, which is, this is not a test and learn. This is not a test to see if multicultural marketing works. This is not a test and learn to see if our campaign works. This is our commitment to figure out how to do it right. And part of that will be that we'll fail. Part of that will be that we'll find pockets and areas where we don't get the same return as others. That's fine, because we're not asking ourselves, should we do in multicultural marketing? We're saying we're committed to serve the multicultural patient in the same way, if not more, than the way we serve the general market patient. And so what I did over the past year or so is, first of all, as you and I were chatting before, my team is by design 95 to 98% external hire. So I think a lot of the job of my team is to lead the rest of the organization in this type of capability. So for multicultural marketing, I hired a multicultural marketing director that had a lot of experience in CPG, because to me that is very insight driven, but also very grounded in P&L and driving results. And so we started to build the capability. We were in market and on television within 4 months from hiring her, which in pharmaceutical years is like 2 seconds, because I
Right.
always say pharmaceutical years are like dog years. They take forever.
Yeah.
So we're in television on 4 months, and we started from the low hanging fruit. So we took extra footage and that we have from the previous shoot for Trulicity, and we started there. But what we did was the same foundational work that we have done for other brands. And so we treated this as any other consumer. And what we found very quickly was that once we did a foundational market research for example, the diabetes journey of an African American patient versus a Hispanic patient versus a Caucasian patient, just very simply key insights of the fact that the same ecosystem of the healthcare system behaves quite differently among the three segments. And then what's driving a Hispanic patient is very different than what's driving an African American patient or a Caucasian patient when it relates to taking action for the diabetes. So from there, once you have the foundation, we teamed up with what we think is one of the best multicultural agencies in the market today. And from there, we were able to paddle a path with creative with our main spot first, and now we are all the way down to separate shoots that are done just for multicultural. So I think the best testament has been how embraced it has been in the long run within the company. I think the end of the back end story is that it's always a great spot to be when now my biggest preoccupation is telling people, hey, this is the multicultural marketing team's job. This is not the brand team's job, because it means everybody's bought in.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, we saw a 44% lift in new business prescription in the Hispanic segment specifically that are directly correlated with the Hispanic campaign that we ran in language. So it was great for people, it's great for an unmet patient need, and it's also driving business results.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I applaud your efforts because it's not easy to, one, make the case that like you made, and two, to make sure it replicates and ultimately drives business at the end of the day. So good job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I want to circle back on something because we talked about this before, and it's not necessarily core to your day job potentially, but you talked when we last spoke about mentoring young and early professional folks, and I know you obviously hustled your way to get those internships, to land that sales job by preparing yourself, making yourself ready and prepared to take on those jobs. So I'm curious, what advice do you give those early career professionals that you're mentoring?
Yeah, I have a lot of passion for early career professionals. They give me a lot of energy. I learn a lot from them, but I do spend a lot of time with them in trying to be the biggest advocate that I can in career management conversations here internally with management. I'm passionate about not only them, but also I'm passionate about creating the next generation of marketers and making sure that the next generation looks a lot different than this generation and a lot more diverse in this generation. So I have passion about infusing diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds into marketing today. So as all of us, we were very pressed for time. So I always trying to make sure that when I do give mentoring time, it goes to people that perhaps have less exposure. Or, one thing I always say is, as you look at the first part of my career, I was always the less obvious choice. So a lot of times I've gotten the job that then propelled me, or I gotten the job that was the opportunity for me to show what I was worth because somebody else believed in me or because somebody else put their name behind me when I really wasn't the obvious choice. And I was looking a lot different than the obvious choice and speaking a lot different than the obvious choice. And I definitely had a whole lot more energy than the obvious choice. And somebody put their names behind me and said, no, let's give her the shot and let's give her the job. And so for me, I feel a huge responsibility and passion about making sure that I hold that door open for the next generation, but also that I speak up when there are career opportunities and I put those people in those opportunities as many times as I can. And so advice I usually tend to give them, on the flip side, there's a lot of ambition and sometimes I talk to a lot of people that are just saying, how do I get to CEO tomorrow or something along those lines. And so I think there's typically three big buckets of advice that I tend to give. And one is, especially early career professional, you have to invest the time in learning a skill set. And the skill set cannot always be general management from day one. To some degree, you have to have some technical skill set, but you also have to be able to negotiate for yourself. And that looks different in the early parts of your career versus later on. Later on, negotiation may mean, on salary and conditions of your work. Early on, I think sometimes you have to negotiate for yourself to get the right amount of responsibilities or get the extra project or being able to be exposed more. So helping them understand, where the negotiation comes in. I was not good at negotiating for myself. To some degree, I still lack in that area. And so I try to, with hindsight 2020, at least at that early parts of the career development, I try to give that advice. The other advice I give is it's always about growth and career for me. So it's not just, what's the next step, but I always want to make sure that as we're thinking about next step for them, they look also where they can learn, and just to not assume that the next career progression step also means additional growth. That it's up to you that to make sure that you have opportunities to stretch yourself, but also that growth is seen. So it's a good mixture between the career, the job, but also the exposure and who will speak on your behalf. And that's important. So, said differently, I try to make them see kind of the behind the scene on how to navigate the culture. And it's kind of big culture that we have at Lilly in terms of corporate rules and unwritten rules that are in succession management to the best of my ability. And I try to give them the transparency that I perhaps didn't get at that stage. And the last piece, which I always try to make sure that it doesn't get lost, is that it's always hard and science together. So they need to develop a technical skill set. They need to perfect their craft and their science, but they can't forget the heart. And I think sometimes I see that in females mentees that I have, or even more diverse mentees in terms of wanting to be perfect at every single part of their job and assuming that if they are, they're going to progress. And part of that is, it's not always about just what you do, but it's also how you do. But I really, really try to make sure that I can be a sounding board for them and almost like a springboard to ensure that they don't lose the passion, because that's like the most beautiful thing to see when you talk to them is just how much passion they have for themselves and for marketing and for the business. And I just want to make sure that they don't try to emulate whoever they look at the top, but they try to keep their true self and understand that that's an asset. And what they need to do is try to find people that value that so that they don't lose their heart and their passion.
That's great advice. Great advice. Well, one of the things I love to do with folks that come on the show is to get to know them as people. And I love asking this question, which is, is there an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, sure. I mean, it would be weird if I said no, right?
Right.
No, I just can't.
Pass the first test. Yes.
Right. No, I just was born like this. No. So, I think obviously, it's a conglomerate of a lot of experience. And obviously, my family has a big part of that. So I think very high level, I'm a daughter of a commander, and that comes with a lot. My father, like I was mentioning before, was in the army, in the Italian army, was a commander in the army. He also was kind of, he is still alive. He's a commander. He also says, once a commander, always a commander. He says, like a priest, you can never retire. So he's retired, but not in his mind. He's always like, do priests retire? They don't. So he's always a priest. So he's always a commander. But he is a commander, a man from the very deep south of Italy, which culturally is, the most deep rooted Italian and Mediterranean culture. And he's an engineer, so it's very rigorous. So those three things made for somebody as rebellious as I am, that made for a very interesting stretch of teenager years in our house.
I bet. Yeah.
But, being the daughter of a commander, I think that came with just a sense of discipline and duty. And also we moved every 2 years while I was little. And so that gave me a different perspective on change. I enjoy change. It excites me. And so I think I see it a lot in my job today. I'm in the middle of transformation, and, I always often have to give these speeches around where we're headed and why change is good. But I do notice a difference that since when I was little, I was changing schools and classmates every 2 years. And while I think looking back and now that I'm a mother myself, I think that would petrify a lot of kids. I still get excited. Like, you tell me I have to move to a new city, and it's exciting to me. And so change is good, but change excites me. I see that as opportunity. And also, obviously who I am today is still so deeply rooted in the Italian culture. I am Italian. I'm still an Italian person that moved to the US. And so, that's very hard to summarize, but I would say, the pillars of poetry and philosophy and big ideas and be in touch of seeking the essence of things every time. I think that has played out both personally and professionally once I moved to the States, and constantly looking to feel or understand what the essence of things are, whether it's on the business side. I deal with obviously huge budgets and huge amounts of change and just investment. But I always try to seek for, at the end of the day, what we do is if you have a medicine that's able to add 8 months of life or more months of life to somebody who has a terminal illness, that's more time with their family once they know they don't have much more than that. I mean, that's the essence of what I do. It's not about how much media budget I'm investing. It's about connecting meaningful information to people that may change their lives or save their lives in the end. So I think those are kind of big things. And it doesn't matter how technical I am, I still am a woman of Italian poetry and art, and that stays with me too.
That's awesome. Well, you've already given advice to younger professionals because I asked you for that, but I'm curious if you were starting all over again, is there any
Mm.
advice that you'd give yourself?
Yes, I was smacking myself upside the head many times. I think if well, we talked about the internship and the Motion Picture Association, and a lot of people like look back, like even here, Lily, because they know me for so long. They're like, "Oh, I remember when you did this, and you stood up and you said this, and they was so fearless." I was like, "No, I was clueless. I had no idea what this meant and who was in the audience. I was clueless." So I mean, hindsight 2020. I think looking back, I would say I would never do that again. I mean, some of the things I've said early in my career, I guess people saw them as courageous, but like now I wouldn't necessarily advise myself to do that. But I think if I had to give myself professionally advice, my younger self, I would say the first piece of advice I would tell myself is that you belong here like anybody else. And I think for the longest, I would probably up until this role or the one prior, for the longest time, I called it kind of the immigrant syndrome, where I would swipe my badge in the morning. I just could not believe it worked every day. I was like, yes, again, like they're letting me work here. And while that's great on one hand, again, now that I have a bigger remit and I manage people careers, I would really tell myself, you belong here like anybody else. You don't have to prove more than other people, and you don't have to be intimidated by other people at the table, even if they want you to feel intimidated. And I think, and this is actually advice I give also early career professionals,
Yeah.
half of the time people that sit around the table actually don't know anything they're doing. So just if you're prepared, don't feel like you don't belong. I think that I would take care of myself a little bit more in that sense. That would be the first one. The second one will probably be negotiate for yourself, because I found out later, if you don't ask, you don't really, you have no chance to get it. And I think it goes hand in hand with the feeling like you belong at the company or a decision-making table, and that you have something to bring. I think it's still an area I'm working on, but if I now that I again manage people, if I look at the gap between women and minorities and how that impact compensation, I think had I been more vocal, or even had I understood a little bit more early on, I think even my current situation would be different. And I certainly want to make sure it is different for people that come after me. So I would say negotiate more. And then the third piece is stay grounded in the things that matter. And this is more personal because the US is an amazing country. It's truly the land of opportunity. You truly can be anything you want in the US if you're willing to put in the work. I truly believe that. But at the same time, for me, I can't ignore the fact that I come from a different culture. And so one advice that I would have for myself is that make sure that in the whirlwind that and this beautiful land of opportunity can offer you, and you can grab everything you want, make sure that you always check in with yourself to stay grounded to what's important in your life personally. And tactical advice I would give myself is, which I try to follow still, is never go more than 1 year without returning to Italy, because that's really Italy. It's where my roots still are and what grounds me. So I love the fact that I can be in this wonderful country and I can grow so much here in a way that I couldn't have done, frankly, in my country. But I would advise myself to make sure that I never go 1 year without going back, which I still try to do.
Mm, that's great advice. Well, two last questions for you. We'll start with the first one. Are there any brands, companies, or causes that you follow or you think other people should take notice of?
If you had asked me this question, maybe a year ago, I always would have answered probably with iconic brands, like probably something out of P&G,
Mhm.
just big brands that have done, like, I would have answered this question with like very rigorous marketing that yielded great campaigns and great creative, and probably something out of P&G and L'Oreal. But I think today the marketing ecosystem is changing. It's fascinating to watch. It's something I love watching. And so I think to answer today, what brands should be we watching? Those are the brands that are able to tap into culture. I really do think that's the next frontier for marketing is, data was something we had to conquer for sure. But the brands that will continue to show up and win in the marketplace to me, and the competitive advantage will be to the brands that are able not only to tap into culture, but almost predict cultural currents, as well as understanding what's the right place for a brand to show up within that cultural discourse, which is very, very tricky and is much more harder than figuring out, what's the right copy test score for your TV ad.
Right.
So, one example would be, I think Nike. You see Nike kind of play across the spectrum, and ultimately with the Copernic campaign, definitely figuring out the right place for that brand, but also being able to take in the backlash that was anticipated for some of that audience. And so brands that understand where to stand for a cultural cause and when to not do that. And then all the way down to, for example, a couple of other examples with the IKEA, with their recycling initiative, or the furniture that helps people with disabilities. So just understanding how do you place yourself at the core of a matter that is important to your audience, but do that in a way that doesn't sell. That in selling, and the success of the brand will come from the ability to place themselves into a discourse of very meaningful conversation without a hard sell. I think it's an art, and I think it's one that we haven't mastered yet as marketers. And for me, it's fascinating to watch because I predict as pharmaceutical companies will be the last ones to follow. I am looking at my colleagues in other verticals. I think it's a fascinating frontier, one that speaks to my heart.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've been noodling this concept, and folks that listen to the show have heard me say this a couple of times. I'm still kind of trying to dig deeper, but this notion of how do we connect culture and commerce through creativity?
Yeah,
It's
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there is a new wave of sorts coming, and it's driven by a lot of things. You mentioned them. I mean, some of it's just the cultural currents and the shifting mindsets of people around the world. But other things, I think, that are going to influence it as well, is just where people consume content, what's available to us as marketers to influence them. I think we're going to have to get more embedded in culture to find those opportunities, and creativity's got to be at the core of it, because they don't exist right now in many cases. So, but anyway, the last question for you is, what do you feel the future of marketing holds?
The future of marketing, I think, I touched a little bit upon the culture piece. I think the future of marketing actually, to me, always roots back to, if we move away from understanding the deep core of human insights, then we're probably not going to have a huge amount. We're going to have infomercials and not a huge future of marketing. So I think the future of marketing is probably the intersection between the amount of data that we'll have available. And again, it's actually back to what you and I were discussing a little bit ago, which is hard and science together. So utilizing the data to really unlock human insights that will ultimately generate value for whatever brand you're promoting, I think is probably finding that balance. And it will not come in the traditional way that we have experienced before. Because again, I think our audiences are changing, and understanding how, back to what we were discussing a second ago, how culturally a brand shows up for their consumers is going to be vital. So I think the future of marketing is actually probably going to be leaders that have understanding of both the marketing side, the business side, so your commerce piece, but also the poetry of being a human being, in my opinion.
No, I love it. Well, Leena, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Alan. It's been a blast.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show.
I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.